Hello, and welcome to Digital.ai, how to deploy to Amazon EKS using Digital.ai deploy and release. I'm Rick Broker. I'm a solutions architect with Digital.ai, and I'll be helping you understand how to do this. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about installing and configuring the XL CLI, the AWS CLI, kubectl, and EKS CTL. Then we're going to show you how to create an Amazon EKS cluster, install an Nginx ingress controller, set up your Digital.ai deploy and release servers, update some values and XL vals for values and secrets and files, create an Amazon EKS namespace, configure a GitHub webhook and add the secrets there, and then create our new version of an application and release it to Amazon EKS. All right, so let's start out by looking at some of our code here. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up our infrastructure using some things like Docker and Docker Compose. We're also going to set up some tools, the XL CLI, the AWS CLI, kubectl, EKS. So let's first start by looking at how we would set those things up. So I have a server here that I'm running, and in this we have a number of items that I've actually already installed. So for installing the AWS CLI, it's a Python library. So you make sure you have Python installed. You can do a pip install there, and that'll install the latest, greatest version of AWS CLI. And then you run the configure on it, and it will set up. I actually have a link in the README on some installation descriptions for that. Then also to install the EKS, which is what I used to actually set up my Kubernetes clusters. I used this. You can see the link up here. The link up here in the top, and this is the command I used to actually install it. So then we have installing kubectl. So let's see how we do that. And there we go. And that's how I did that. Now, actually, if I go and look at the README here, I've actually down at the bottom, I have references for all these things. So there's some how-to guides on each one of those. And also in here, I did do a thing where I actually created an EKS cluster. And basically what you can do is, if you look at the how-to guides, it actually tells you pretty much how to do that. So let's see, I think this was it. Yeah, so the EKS cluster, you can use the EKS CTL, and you can just do this to start up, and you can give you some more directions that you can actually use a YAML file to set up. But this is the basics of how to do that. There's also, this is sort of where I got the how-to guide on how to install EKS CTL and the AWS CLI version 2. And then finally, I also have the kubectl documentation, which is also linked in it. So that's like getting all the tools installed that you need. And then in order to create that EKS cluster, like I said, you can, it's not that one, it's this one. You can just do this EKS CTL cluster, give it a name and a version, and it'll go and create it. Now, if you do the without node group, obviously, then you'll have to go back in and add your node groups to it. All right, so that's creating the EKS cluster. Now, the next thing is to install the ingress controller. So I thought about using Helm, but then I was looking through the AWS documentation, and I came across this. Now, interesting thing about this is that they're just using a YAML file to do this. And while for the purposes of this how-to, I just used this kube apply to do this, I could actually have done that just as easily by using the using the Helm or KDS plugin for Excel deploy to actually do this via deploy instead of doing it from the command line. So maybe in a later how-to, we'll actually go through how to do that sort of thing. Then in setting up deploy and release, like I said, I used Docker containers for this. You don't have to go and get any extra licensing or anything. You can, just for the purposes of this how-to and learn how to do it, it comes with a brief license so you can spin it up and do some test stuff with it. So this is how I set that up in the Docker Composes. So I'll be in the repo. And so all I had to do is run Docker Compose up and it started the whole thing. So now I have a Kubernetes cluster. I have my release and deploy installed and so forth. So what we need to do then is we need to figure out how we can configure deploy to talk to our Kubernetes cluster. So a couple things. I have these secrets XL vals example files in here. And so the first thing we're going to need to do is we go to log into our account in AWS and get our password. So one of the things you can do when you're in AWS is you can go to my account. Actually, probably want to go here. And in our actual account here, we have 15 users, but I'm only interested in me. So I'll go down here to this guy and I can actually create security credentials here. And so I have these two, and now I can only, look at these when I create them, but then I take the values that I get here and I can actually add some additional, add those into my configuration. So that's how I'll put those into that values for these two properties. And then change the name from example, just take that dot example off and we'll be able to use that. Then the other one is the values. So a couple things here is like, okay, well, what region am I going to install this in? So for me, I'm actually installing these things in the Ohio region. So that's US East 2. So that will put US East 2 here and then the cluster name. So in my case, I made a cluster name RB-EKS cluster. So I'll put that cluster in there. And then the API server URL, I need to get that actually from this page. So that's this right here. And then there's a CA cert that I need for this. So that's the certificate of authority here. So with those things, I'll actually be able to connect to my EKS cluster. And then I'm going to create a ingress host and for test and prod, and I'm using nip.io, so I'll use that. So this is what my actual configuration looks like, and I use the nip.io stuff, so I can just put this test with the IP address in here, and I got the IP address because I did a lookup on the ingress controller. So if I go back to here and so if I get all the services, we'll notice that for my ingress controller, I have a host name. And what I did here is I just did a dig on the host name and took one of the IP addresses so that I could have a nip.io address here. So that gets us set up in the config files for this. Then for release, I have a couple more. So what's the name? What's the password and the release admin password and the deploy password and the deploy server URL and the deploy server username. So you'll notice that, I in my Docker Compose YAML file, I've actually defined those passwords so we know what they are. So if I go back over here to deploy, you'll notice that I don't have any applications or environments or infrastructure defined. We just have the ones sample out of the box tutorials thing. So if I go back to my Excel CLI here, I can I can apply the YAML file DAI deploy.yaml. Then I can go and do the same thing on the DAI release.yaml file. And that'll actually set up my environments for release and deploy. So if we go back over here and click on folders again, you can see we now have a new release template that's defined for us for this. And if I go over here to deploy, I now actually have my test app. I have an environment, a couple environments, and I have some infrastructure. And if we want to, we can actually test that by checking the connection to this infrastructure. And so I can actually connect to my Kubernetes cluster from here. So now we're pretty much ready to actually do the deployment. Now, a couple things I need to do here is in my configuration in GitHub, I need to make a couple settings changes. So there's a GitHub repo that we defined here in our ZB Labs community deploy to K8s. This is where all the example code is at. And what I want to do is I want to fork that, which I've already done. So I have this fork here. And I need to set up a few things in here. So I set up a number of secrets for this that my GitHub Actions is going to use. And I've actually implemented allowed all actions. So I have some GitHub Actions that are defined, and I've enabled those in this repo. And in the secrets, I've created a number of things. So I have to have a Docker account. So I have to have a Docker password, a Docker username, and the repo. So in my case, that repo is our broker. So it's going to be building things and putting in my repo. And then when I can create my Docker images there. And then I have the XLD password, the URL, and user. Now, if you're running this locally, you're going to realize that, you know what, I actually am running a Docker container on my own workstation. So how can GitHub get to that? So we have a solution for that, and that is to use ngrok. So I have 2 copies of ngrok here. So one of the things I'll do before I start doing this is I've configured ngrok to have a configuration file just to make life a little bit easier for me. And so I actually have one set up to talk to release and one set up to talk to deploy. And so we're going to start up the deploy one. So, and then I'll also start up the release one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these URLs here and I'm going to add those to my GitHub repo so I can connect them. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get the deploy one. And I'm going to copy that into one of my secrets that I had here. So the XLD URL, I'm going to put that here. So there we go. We got that. Now, the other thing I want to do is I'm going to have this probably, so this isn't probably the best way to do this, but what happens is it's a good way of showing another way of actually integrating with release and deploy. In GitHub Actions, I can also call a webhook whenever I do a build. And so I want to set up a webhook to call to start my release template. So I'm going to replace this with the URL that I have for release over here, which is this one. And you'll notice that every time I start this ngrok thing, it actually creates a new URL for me. So now that I have that in place, we want to select individual events. I want to only look at pull requests and push events. And then I'm going to update this webhook. So cool. So now I'm all set up that whenever I make a change to my GitHub repo, it's going to start this GitHub action, and the GitHub action is going to do some things. And we can actually look at that in the source code here. So let's actually look at our source code and see what it does. So we have this GitHub thing. It's a build YAML. And so this is what it's going to do. Whenever I make a change, it's going to run this job, and the job is actually going to get these environment variables and call the build.sh. Build.sh does a number of things. So basically it does the Docker build, pushes that Docker build to the Docker repo, modifies this hello Python YAML file, and then it downloads the XL CLI and does an apply, and then it removes that hello Python YAML file. So this basically creates, all this does is creates a package in deploy that we could use to later on deploy, and then the webhook is what calls release. I could just as easily as also had it call release at the end of this to start the release template with the XL CLI. All right, so now that we have all that in place, let's take a look at my program here. So I had this main.py. This is we have this little Flask application that's going to run, and then every time I call it, it's going to call that, it's going to print this out. So let's change this message. So we're going to have it ask us about if we'd like to do a nice game of chess. And so stage this, commit this, and then I'm going to push this change. And when I push this change, what that's going to do is it's going to tell GitHub to actually run that GitHub action and build a new container for us. So if we go back to GitHub and we look at our actions, we can see that we have a change message guy here, and he's running for 6 seconds, and it's actually in the process of building our image. And when it's done doing that build on the image, what it's going to do is going to push the results of that image off to deploy so it can be deployed by release. And it doesn't take it very long to do this. And then when it's done, you can see that we are pushing it off to docker.io. And it is applying it, and you can see the output where it's apply. Okay, so let's go back over here to deploy, and if we expand this, sure enough, there's our new package with the hello Python YAML file in it. And also, if we go over here and we look in our releases, yep, we have a new release that's running, and it is actually, it's already been started because that webhook actually went and started the release. And we need to give this a little bit of a time to work through the housekeeping thing. But the general idea here is, now that we've actually created the release, this release can execute the steps like calling deploy to deploy things. And you could put any number of additional tasks in here that represents your release pipeline. So if you wanted to do some testing or something like that, automated testing, you could do that sort of stuff in here. But this is just a really basic sort of release pipeline, so you can get the idea of how release and deploy can work together. So I'm not sure what happened here. Let's take a look at this. So every once in a while, some of these things will actually fail. So let's actually just try this again to see if it'll work. And you know what? I think I realized what I did here. I skipped a step along the way. If we were to look at our pipeline, we'd realize that I forgot to create for us namespaces. Yep. So notice we don't have a namespace. So let's. Oh, by the way, I could also do these things with deploy as well. So actually, so let's go back over here to this, and we'll try this again. Say forgot to create namespace, and we'll go ahead continue it, and hopefully it'll be a little bit more successful this time. Yeah, I think we're going to be a little bit more successful this time around. Also, we can go over here and we can double click on this. Well, I guess it's already done. Maybe not. Maybe I missed it. Oh, there it is. It's just finishing up here. And then I can open this and we see our nip.io URL. So we can open this tab. And there's how about a nice game of chess. So that's sort of what we expected. We can complete this guy. And then we go to here. Now, the other thing we should notice is we can actually see pods. So you can see that we have prod pods and we have test pods for that. Or actually, I could do. How about we do deployments? There. So we have 5 pods, instances ready for prod, and 5 for test. All right. And of course, we're done here. We can actually go and look at this and verify that this URL is working. And there it is. How about a nice game of chess? So let's run through this one more time. Actually, I want to leave this guy open. Yep. All right. So let's make one more change to this, and we'll do this one more time. We'll go back here, and we'll just let's just change this back to the way it was. Save it. Push this change. And it'll kick that whole process off all over again. So if we go back to our here and look at our actions, we can see that it's actually building again. Sort of like we did last time. Now, of course, this time what'll happen is we're going to make a new version of that application where it's changed the message. And so I just wanted to do that so you could see that change. And then actually it's going to go through here pretty quickly this time. Probably still cached from the previous one. All right, so we're just about done here. Okay, so we should have our new application. Look at this. We can we go back and look at this. We can see from the output here that it's going to do a 3F 8C 74. And if I go back over here, yep, there it is right there. Okay, so now let's go back over here, and we should be able to see that we have another release running. There it is, and it's actually in that housekeeping stage again. Now, I expect this time it's not going to fail that deploy test because remember we already have created the namespaces for this guy, and so it should actually run all the way through. And when we get this guy deployed, we'll be able to see that the message has in fact changed. So this is also Systems illustrates a number of things. So this shows you how we can continuously do deployment and do integrations without. We didn't have to write any scripts to do this. We just, had that YAML file, and we just keep updating that. And so here we go. now we're back here to this. We can test the snip.io address again. And look, so it's got this message versus the production guy had this message. Let's go ahead and approve this, and we'll complete this, and we'll move forward. This guy, and when he finishes the deployment into prod, instead of me going on the link, I'm just going to go back to this production URL, and we'll just update that. All right, so we'll just update this guy, and you can see that that changed. So we'll close these guys, and we'll complete this task. Now, one of the other things I want to point out, and we'll do this because just for the ability to clean things up in deploy, I actually have this prod guy set up here, so I can actually undeploy this. So we'll actually do that. And it's pretty, the thing that's kind of cool is I can deploy and undeploy whichever version I want here, and it'll actually make that the state that we want it to be in our Kubernetes cluster. So when I get done undeploying this, and we'll go back over here to kubectl, and we do git deployments. So you see I have 0 or 5 pods. It's actually in the process of getting rid of that guy. And when I actually finish this process, so the resource is now deleted. So if I go back over to kubectl, that prod pod is gone. If I go back over here and I do the same thing with the test one, it'll remove that guy from here as well. Go while that's deleting, we'll go over here and we'll see how it's like scaling those things down, and then see if there's no pods left. And then while we're waiting, it'll eventually clean up all that those resources, and it'll be gone too. So that's kind of how you can actually do a whole EKS release pipeline and deployment using Digital.ai release and deploy. So thank you. I hope you guys enjoyed that and you find this useful. And as always, if you have any questions, you need some help, feel free to reach out to Digital.ai deploy for release and deploy help. Thank you.